Hi all. In this activity, we are going to implement a web application using Spring MVC framework. So here we are going to implement a small web application. In that we have a form, HTML form, which takes some user inputs, and after that we are going to pass this user inputs to the server side. From the server side, we are going to use the MVC framework, and then we are going to display this user entered data again to the user. So let's see how we are going to implement this application. First, we will create a Maven project here. So I will go to new and I'm going to select project, and from here I'm going to select Maven project. So next I'm going to use the default workspace location, so therefore I'm not giving any information here. So I will move to the next window. From here we can select the archetype. So here, since I'm going to implement a web application, I'm going to use Maven archetype web app 1.0. So if you can't see these archetypes, so then this catalog, from this catalog options you need to select internal. So then you can select this archetype web app and you can move to the next window. And here we are going to give some information about the project. Group ID means company or group name. So here I am using this com.myapp as the group ID, and artifact ID means name for this project. So I will give the name as since this is activity 3, I will give the name as activity 3. So if you need, you can change this version as well, and then you can click on finish. Once you click on finish, you can see that the Maven project is now created. Once you come to this place, so you can click enter and you can finish this project creating task. So now you can see we are having this Maven project named as activity 3. But you can see that we are having some issues here. The first one is we are having an error with this pom.xml file. So we will see what is this error. I'm going to open this file and you can see that there is an error. So this error is actually because of a missing plugin. So I can add this missing plugin into my working environment and then I can fix this issue. So if you are also getting this error, so then I already uploaded a sample code file to the VLE. You can see it under the resources folder and you can open it, and in that one I already added this code part. So that means the code lines that you need to use here to fix this issue. So if you are getting this issue, so then you also can fix this issue by adding this part. So we will see how we are going to add this part into this pom.xml file. So this is the file. So here you can see we are having some code lines like this, and I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to add this one into my pom.xml file after this final name tag. So now I will do some formatting here. Okay, now I'm going to save this file. Once I saved it, you can see now that issue is fixed. but still we are having another issue. So it's coming from this source folder. So I'm going to fix that issue by using by adding a web server into my project environment. So I'm going to right click on this project, and I'm going to properties, and from properties I'm going to select this targeted runtimes. So from here you can see that we are having so in my case I'm having two targeted runtimes, two Apache versions. If you don't see any targeted runtimes, then you can go to new and you can add a targeted runtime into this environment. And here I'm going to select this Apache Tomcat 8.0 version, and then I'm going to apply it, and then apply and close. So now you can see we fixed that issue as well. So now we will run this project, and we will see whether we are getting the default index page. Yes, so we are getting the default index page. Okay, now we need to implement this HTML form. So we will go to this index.jsp file. It is under the source main web app, and you can see the index.jsp file. So I'm going to change this one. So we need to add this form. So therefore first I will add the form tag, and action, I will use the action as register, and we need to have a method get or post. So here we are going to use post. Okay, then I will use a table structure to add this content nicely into this into the interface. So here we are going to add a text type input field. So I need to add 3 more. So therefore I will paste the same thing. We need to add last name and username and password. For the password, we need to use the input type as password, and we will change the names as well. We need to add the submit button as well. So here the type will be submit, and we are using the value here. The value is register. Okay, now we will run this one. Okay, now you can see the HTML form is correctly displaying, and if you click on register, so it's passing this URL pattern to the server side. So now we need to implement. So we need to implement the server side code to handle this URL pattern. So now we will see how we are going to implement that part. So before that, we need to understand how the Spring framework is actually working. So when we were discussing about this Spring framework, so we discussed the architecture of this Spring framework. So I told you that when a browser is sending any request, that request is coming to a controller, which we are normally calling as the front controller. All the requests are coming to the front controller. But when we were implementing this MVC based application in a normal way without using this Spring framework, so you may remember that once you are going to submit information from the browser side, that information is actually comes to a specific file called web.xml. So in that web.xml file, we are actually adding the mappings, URL mappings and the servlet's names. So once that request comes to the server side, it will first check the web.xml file, and in the web.xml file we are mentioning if we are getting this kind of URL pattern, so then this is the servlet that we need to call, or that this is the servlet that this servlet is going to handle this request. So we mention this thing under the web.xml file. But in Spring context, so we are having a controller called front controller. So this front controller is actually we are calling as a dispatcher servlet. It's a class, servlet class comes under this Spring framework. So in this Spring, this dispatcher servlet is responsible to handle all the requests, and it's calling to this handler mapping, and then it's finding the controller, and it's going to hand over this thing to the controller, and the controller will do the task, do the work, and it's going to give the output, the model, to the dispatcher servlet again. Then the model will then the dispatcher servlet will call to the views resolver, and then the dispatcher servlet is going to find out the correct view, and it's going to bind this model into the view, and then we are going to get that view from the dispatcher servlet again to the web server side. So that is how it's working. So therefore, not like in the previous case, in this case we need to send all these requests to the dispatcher servlet. So that is the first thing we need to do. So how we are going to configure it? We are going to configure it through the web.xml file. So we already did it. So when we were doing practicals with servlet, we changed this web.xml file, and from that we actually mentioned what is the correct servlet for a given URL pattern. So the same thing we are going to do here as well, but in this case we are going to pass all the requests to the dispatcher servlet. So let's see how we are going to do that part. So I'm going to open this web.xml file now. So you can see we don't have any mapping here. So I'm going to add the content into this web.xml file. So the content of the web.xml file I already added to this Spring required coding samples file. So this is the content of the web.xml file. So I'm going to copy that part, and then I'm going to add it here, save it, and now we will see what are the contents available under this web.xml file. So I'm going to use the display name as activity 3, and servlet name I will use as the front controller. So you can give any name, but here I will use it as front controller. And here also we will use the front controller as the name. Okay, so now we can see in this part we are having the information about the servlet. So the name of the servlet is the front controller, and then the servlet class. So you can see this dispatcher servlet, we are not going to implement this servlet, it is coming from this Spring framework. So then again we are having something called load on startup. So the meaning of this one is, if you are using load on startup as 1, so then once the server is loading, this dispatcher servlet is also going to load. If you are not using this tag, that means once a request comes, only the servlet or the dispatcher servlet is going to load. Okay. So now here, since we are using this value, once the server is loading, this dispatcher servlet is also going to load. And then the other part is the servlet mapping. So here you can see we are having the URL pattern. So the meaning of this pattern is, any request comes to the server side. So that's the meaning of this one. Any request comes to the server side is actually going to pass to this front controller. Okay, you can see we are giving a servlet name. Any request which is coming to the servlet, which is coming to the server side, is going to handle by this front controller. What is the front controller? This is the front controller. It's actually the dispatcher servlet, comes under Spring framework. Okay, so that is what we did in this web.xml file. So after configuring this one, so now you can see if you are sending any request to the server side, the server is going to handle, server is going to give this request to the front controller. So then the front controller means the dispatcher servlet. Then the dispatcher servlet is going to handle this request. Okay, so now we completed the first part. Next, we need to configure this dispatcher servlet. So I told you that in the Spring framework, so we need to use some configurations to configure this framework. Okay, so now in this framework we are having this dispatcher servlet, and now we need to have another configuration file to configure this dispatcher servlet. Okay, so when you are going to add this configuration file, so we need to follow a specific standard when we are naming this file. So we discussed that thing. So this is how we need to name it. Your servlet name, here the your servlet name means, what is my servlet name? So that is front controller. So this is the name of my servlet name. And then you need to add the servlet.xml, the other part. Okay, so first you need to add the servlet name, and after that you need to add servlet.xml. So I'm going to add it now. So under this web.inf folder, I'm going to add new other XML file, and now I'm going to name it. So I'm going to use this name, front controller, and servlet, front controller, and after that we need to add the servlet.xml. Now I'm going to click finish. Okay, now I'm going to add the configurations into this XML. So those configurations also uploaded to the VLE. So you can copy these configurations, and we are going to add this to this XML file. Okay. So now we will see the things available in this configuration file. First, we are having some schema details, schema information. So after that, we can see we are having this context component scan, and we are going to give the base package. So the meaning of this one is, we are telling to the Spring framework where our controllers are. So then the Spring framework is going to scan this package. So you can see I'm going to use a package called com.myapp.controller. So that is the package. I'm going to add all my controllers inside this package. So then the Spring can scan it, and it can create bean objects it can create some bean objects with these controllers. Okay, so that is why we are giving where our controllers are. So then I'm going to create a package like this. So I'm going to Java resources. Here you can see we can't see the source main Java here. So I'm going to add this one. So you can go to properties, and you can go to this Java build path. From here you can select this JRE and Maven dependencies, and then apply and close. So now you can see this source main Java is available. So now I'm going to click here and new, and I'm going to create a package, and I'm going to give the name as com.myapp.controllers. Okay, so now I created this package. Also I need to create some bean object here, so therefore I'm going to create another package here. So I will add another package. That package name is com.myapp.beans. Okay, now I added these two packages. So after that we can see what is the next code. So here you can see, here we are going to use this view resolver. So that is again available under Spring framework. View resolver is going to find the correct view, and it's going to load to the client side. So in this architecture, so you can see that we are having a view resolver here, and from the through the view resolver, so we are going to find out the correct view here. And then we added some configuration to this view resolver. So that means the prefix and suffix. So that means once a controller is passing a view from the controller side, so we are going to add this prefix and suffix into that controller. So think that the controller is going to send the display as the output. So then we are going to add this prefix to this display. Display is the output, and this suffix. So now we can see the path of our view. So you can see that web.inf folder, we need to have another folder called JSP. So that is how we are going to configure it. So therefore I'm going to create another folder called JSP inside this web.inf. Okay, now we configured this front controller servlet. So next the next step is, so we need to add the dependencies into our working environment, because now we are going to use the Spring framework. So therefore we need to use certain packages, libraries here. So therefore we need to add these things into our working environment. So since we are using the Maven as the build tool, so we can configure it through the Maven pom.xml file. So then the Maven will automatically add these dependencies into our environment. So that is one benefit we are getting by using a build tool like Maven. So we are going to add it now. So I'm going to open this pom.xml file. So now we are having one dependency here. So we are going to add the other dependencies. So I already uploaded these dependencies to this file. So you can copy these dependencies, and then you can add these dependencies here. So now you can save it. Once you save it, so the Maven will automatically add these dependencies into your working environment. So we will see what are the dependencies we are going to use here. Spring framework, Spring MVC. So that is one dependency that we are going to use here. And the other one is servlet API, and other one is JSTL. So that is that tag, JSTL tags we are going to use when we are going to build the application. So that is why we are going to use this as a dependency here. So if you don't know this dependency, so you can go to this Maven repository. You can go to Maven repository, and so you can give the name of this one. So since here we are going to use Spring MVC, then you can see we are getting results like this. You can go inside this one and you can select the version. So here we are going to use 5.1, and this one. Okay, now you can see this is the dependency. So you can copy it and you can paste it. Likewise, if you need any dependency, you can go to this Maven repository and you can type it here, and after that you can copy it and you can paste it into the Maven file. For example, think that you are going to use this JSTL tag as a dependency, so then you can type JSTL here. So then you are getting the JSTL like this. So then you can select the correct dependency and then you can add it. Okay, now we added these dependencies into our working environment. So now as the first step, so we are going to create a bean class here, because now we are going to handle this user information. So therefore we will create a bean class called a user here. So it's a Java class. So we are going to create a bean class called user here, and so I will add some properties. And then so I will add a default constructor here. So I'm going to create this as a Java bean class. So therefore I'm going to add a constructor, and I'm going to add the getters and setters. So now I created getters and setters. Okay, and I'm going to implement this using serializable interface. To make it as a bean class. Okay, now I added these things into this one. Okay, now I'm going to create my controller here. I'm going to this com.myapp.controllers. I'm going to add a new Java class here. So I will name my controller as my controller. Then I will click finish. So now this is a controller. So therefore we need to add the annotation here as the controller. You can see that the control annotation is coming from this Spring framework. Okay, now we added this as a controller. So now we need to have a method to handle the request coming from the server side, because once we request something from the server is going to send this request to the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet we configured to scan these controllers. So then the dispatcher servlet will create some connection with this controller, and then we are inside this controller. So we need to have a method to handle this request. Okay, so now in our case, from this index.jsp side, so we are actually sending a URL pattern like register, and the method of this one is post. Okay, so therefore we are going to add a method here. add a method here to handle this post request called register. Okay, so I will create a public method here. And here I'm going to pass a string value. The string value means the name of the view I'm going to pass here. So therefore I will add the return type as string, and then I will give a name for this method. You can give any name here. So for example, we will think that this is register. Okay, and you can create the method like this, and we need to return something. So we think that we are going to return the view as display. Okay, as display. So now we need to add some annotations here to tell to the framework that we are going to handle which request through this method. Okay, to do that we are having a special annotation called at request mapping. Okay, so we are having a special annotation called at request mapping. Okay, so in that one, if you are using request mapping like this, so then it will handle the get request, because the default value for this request mapping is the get request. But if you are going to handle a post request, so then we need to specifically mention we are going to handle a post request with this request mapping method. Okay, so therefore I'm going to add first I'm going to add the value. So here value means what is the URL pattern I'm going to handle here. So my URL pattern is register. Okay, so I'm going to handle the URL pattern called register, and then I need to mention what is the method. What is the method I'm going to use, because we are having get method, post method. So therefore we need to specifically mention method here. Method here, request method, and the request method is request method dot post. Okay, so this is the method. So if you are not using this request method dot post option here, so then it will actually handle the get method, because the default value is the get method. So therefore if you are actually handling get methods, so you don't need to add it like this. So you can add it like this, at request mapping, and you can directly add. You can directly add it like this if you are actually handling a get method. But since we are handling a post method here, so we need to add it like this. So now once the dispatcher controller pass this register URL into the controllers, so then this method is going to call, because this method is actually configured to handle this register type URL pattern. Okay, so now we will see whether we can get the output here. So this here the view, we are going to return the view as display. So therefore I'm going to create a view called display. So this is the place we are going to create the views. So I'm going to create a JSP file here. So name of my JSP file is display. Okay, we will type something like hi. Okay, now we will run this project, run this file. Okay, I'm going to restart this server. I'm going to click on this register. So now you can see we are getting the output as hi. So that means request request actually went to the dispatcher servlet. From the dispatcher servlet, the request actually passed to this controller, my controller, and then in the my controller, so I'm having a method to handle this register type URL patterns. So this is the method. So this method is going to return view as display. We are not doing anything here now, but just we are sending the name of the view to the controller side again, dispatcher controller, and dispatcher controller using this view resolver, it's going to find the correct view page. So normally the view pages are inside this JSP folder. So that is how we configured it. So we are having display.jsp under this JSP folder. So then the dispatcher servlet is going to send this display.jsp file to the client side or the user side. So that is why we are getting the message, the text like hi, because we added hi inside this display.jsp file. Okay, now we will try to complete our work here. So here what we need to do is, once we got this information about the user, so we need to save this information to the being class. So that is how we implemented this thing when we were doing it with the normal MVC method. Or that means the traditional approach without using any framework. We already implemented this application. Once we were implementing this application, how we implemented it, once we got this information to the server side, we created a bean object. So here we are having a bean class called user. We created an object of this user class, and after that we call to this get set methods, and we saved this information into this bean class. So then we again call to get methods, and from the display.jsp, from the view side, we actually call to this get method, and we displayed this information to the user. So that is how we implemented in the previous case. So that means in the normal way. But here we are actually going to use the MVC framework. In the MVC framework, we can do it very easily without adding so many code lines like in the previous case. So we will see how we are going to create, or how we are going to implement that part. So in the MVC framework, we are having something called @model attribute. With this @model attribute, we can directly put the requested data into a model object. Okay. So now we are going to use that thing. So inside this argument, inside this method argument place, so we are going to add this @model attribute. This is the annotation coming with this coming with this Spring framework. And here we need to mention what is the object name we are going to create here. For example, think that I am going to create an object called user, and now we need to tell what is the bean class we are going to use to create this object. Okay, this is actually the model name, and then the object we are going to create here. So we are going to create user object. Okay, now we need to add this user into our control environment. So this is user. Okay, now I added this user. So here once we are calling to this register method, so since we are using a post method, the post method will send some information to the user side. So then we are going to use this model attribute is going to put these post values into this user model. Okay, that's it. We are not doing anything here now. So we added the data into the user object here. So now we are going to get these values from the display.jsp site. So now I'm going to the display.jsp site. So this is the display.jsp. Okay, and here I will change this user details. So how we need to display it, this is how we need to display it: first name, last name, username, passwords. So this is how we are going to display. So now we are going to call to the model. What is the name of the model? So we created the name of the model as user here. So this is the name of the model, and this is the object name. Okay, so the name of the model, we use this @model attribute. I told you that this is a special attribute, or the annotation comes with this Spring framework. By using this @model attribute, we can directly put the information that we are getting through the request to a model object. Okay, so we create the model object as user, and then we actually by executing this line, we are actually going to put these values into the user object. So then we are going to access this model, because now the model is binded with the view. So now we are going to access this one. So how we are going to access it? So this is how we are going to access it. So we are going to access the user model, and we are going to get the first name here. So we are going to get the first name, user dot first name. Okay, so we will see whether it's working correctly. I'm going to run this one now. I will add the first name as test. Okay, you can see now I can display the first name here. So now I'm going to display the other things as well. Username and password, and then I'm going to change this into last name, username, and password. Now I can run this one. Okay, now I'm going to type okay. So you can see that we are getting the values like this. Now in this case, actually we use the Spring framework. So you can see that it's very easy when you are going to use the Spring framework. We don't need to use much code lines here, because we are actually going to give the control to the Spring side, and then the Spring will actually do the most of the things for us. So that is why we are calling Spring as a IOC design principle based framework. Okay, so that means inversion of control. So we are giving the control to the Spring side, the framework side, and the framework will do several works on behalf of us. So here you can see, if you are doing it in normal way, so then we need to create a use object, and we need to call to this setter method, and we need to add these values to the setter method, this bean object. But here, by using this @model attribute, we created a model here. Then through this model, we binded this information, user information. We created a user object and we binded this object into this model called user. Okay, now once with the control is passing this output to the dispatcher servlet, it's going to pass the name of the view and the model. So then the dispatcher servlet is calling to the view resolver and finding the view, and it's going to bind this model into the view. So then we can display the values with the view. So that is how it's actually happening. But here we are actually displaying the password in the plain text. So if you need to encrypt it, so we discussed that we can use you can use the normal class that we are normally using to encrypt these things. So I'm going to create another package here. So I will create a package called com.myapp.services, because I'm going to add it as a service, this encryption part. So then inside this I'm going to create a class called md5. Okay, then you can use the same class that we use with different same class that we use in previous activities. So this is that class. I'm going to use the same class here as well. I'm going to copy this code and I will add it here. Okay, now I'm going to call to this class once I'm going to save this password. So I'm going to this user being class here. So I'm going to save it here. Okay, set password. So here I'm going to save it. So I'm going to call to this md5 class and I'm going to use this get md5 method. Okay, now I can use this service class and I can encrypt it once I'm going to save it into the bean object. Okay, so now we will see how we are going to display it. Okay, now you can see we encrypted the password, and if you are going to save this to the database, then we can save the encrypted password to the database. Okay, so that's it about this activity. So let's recap what we did here. First, we created a Maven project and then we created this HTML page. So after that, we created the web.xml file. So that is where we are going to map the URL patterns with the correct servlet. But I told you that since we are going to use the Spring framework in the Spring, so all the requests are going to handle through a controller called front controller. Front controller is coming with the servlet class dispatcher servlet. So therefore we are going to add this dispatcher servlet. So here you can see if I open this one, so we are going to add this dispatcher servlet class inside this front controller. Now if you are getting any request to the server side, it will call to the front controller. That means it will actually call to this dispatcher servlet. So after that, we need to configure the dispatcher servlet. So we are going to add some configurations. When we are adding the configuration file, so I told you that first we need to use the servlet name. So here front controller, and after that we need to use servlet.xml. And we added several configurations here. So under this we actually mentioned where our controllers are, and also we mentioned where our views are. So here we told that our views inside this web.inf folder, and we created a folder called JSP. Inside that we are having the views, and then we mentioned this is the suffix. So that means actually the extension of this one. So since we are adding these properties, once we are passing the view from the controller side, we don't need to add an extension here. If you are not setting those things, actually you need to add this extension like this. Since we are configuring it here, so we are telling that our views are using .jsp, our views are JSP files. So therefore we are not going to add any extension here. We are just passing what is the name of our controller. Okay, so then this view resolver will pick the correct controller, and then then the dispatcher servlet is going to bind the model into this view. Okay, so once the request comes, first it will go to the dispatcher servlet. So then inside this dispatcher servlet dispatcher servlet configuration file, we mentioned where our controllers are. So then the dispatcher servlet is going to find our controller. So this is a controller. Inside that I'm having the request mapping. So that means once I get a request, I'm going to map it with a method here. So this is my method. Okay, so if I'm getting a request like this, then I'm going to map it with this one. So that is what we are doing here. Once we are mapping it, so we are using this model attribute. Model attribute means we are going to automatically create a model, and then the information which are coming through the request, we are going to put into this model. Here we are going to create a user object, and through the user object we are going to set these values into our user object. So now we are going to return what is our view. So here view, the display is the name of our view. It's going to return to the control side. By using this view resolver, dispatcher controller is going to find what is the correct view. So then the correct view is display.jsp. Now we are getting a model, and we are getting a model as well. So now the dispatcher servlet is going to bind this model with our view. Since it's already the model is also with the view now, so I can directly call to this view, call user, and I can display the information here. So that is how we implemented this one. So now we can see when we are using this Spring framework, we can do the same thing with less coding and less effort, because we already implemented this activity using the traditional approach. So that means by creating controllers, views, and models. In that way, in that approach, you may remember that we use so many code lines, but here with few code lines we can achieve the same task, we can achieve the same objective. Okay, so that's about this activity. So then you can also try this one, and you can also see how it's going to work. Thank you.